We're in a little sermon series at the moment, exploring the theme, the idea of doubt in the Christian life, in the life of faith. What does it mean to experience and to know and to have doubts? In part one was last week. Today's part two. Next week, let me just say right at the start, part three is going to be something of a Q&A. We don't normally kind of do that here very often, but we're going to have a bit of a Q&A about doubts in the Christian life. So if you've got particular questions that you'd like to ask, if you could get them to me in the week ahead, so maybe by Thursday this week, I'll kind of feed those into the sermon for next week. So we'll be able to have some kind of opportunity to think together and reflect and to ask some questions about doubt in the Christian life. So get your questions to me if you've got anything in particular that you'd like to ask. I've still got loads of things to say, so I'm not going to run out of things to say. If there aren't any questions, that's completely fine. But we do have a bit of flex next week if you want to feed in. Psalm 73, we're on page 585 and 586. I'd be really grateful if you'd keep that open this morning. It's a little bit like, this psalm's a bit like going to the doctor. We meet someone, a man called Asaph, who is in the deepest depths of doubt in his believing life. And he's written it all down in this psalm, and his psalm gives us something of a diagnosis of doubt and a prescription. So last week was the diagnosis. That's what we spent our time thinking about, that even in the lives of spiritual giants, even in the life of someone who's written a psalm that's in the Bible, we find someone explaining that he's experiencing really, really deep doubts. And he describes it like a kind of dizziness. So verse 2, if you've got page 586 open, he says, "As for me, my feet had almost slipped. I'd nearly lost my foothold." He's like a climber kind of going up a cliff face, and he can't work out, he can't see where the next handhold is. He doesn't know where to put his feet. He's really struggling. He's got so much uncertainty about where the footholds are and whether they are strong enough. And that kind of uncertainty and doubt is just part of the life of faith. That's what believers experience. I don't know if you noticed it in that short reading we had from Matthew 28. Isn't that an amazing detail, that the resurrected Jesus, the risen Jesus, meets with his disciples on a mountainside in Galilee. He's come back to new life from the dead, and we're told that some of his disciples worshipped him and some doubted. And you think they would, wouldn't they? You would, wouldn't you? How can this be happening? But even at that moment, some doubt. Doubt is a part of the life of faith. But this week, we're going to think much more about the prescription, about how Asaph kind of guides us through his doubts, about how he worked his way through those doubts. And the doubts that he had weren't terminal to his faith, but actually they just served to underpin his faith, to give it a deeper and richer kind of strengthening as he worked his way through. How does that happen? How can doubt be a doorway into deeper and richer communion with the Lord? Here are three ways that Asaph gives us, three keys. And the first we get in verse 3. I envied the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. And the first key that we're given is simply this, and maybe it's familiar to some of us, but here we go. We need to doubt our doubts. That's the first key to working through our doubts. We need to doubt our doubts. Why is it that Asaph is so full of doubts? Well, he tells us really clearly, I envied the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. We spoke about this a little last week. He's kind of seeing injustice in the world, and he's seeing that people who are ruthlessly exploiting others, pursuing their own ends, are being rewarded for it. And you kind of think, okay, fine, he's got a problem with that. But then read down to verse 13 and 14. It says in verse 13, "Surely in vain have I kept my heart pure. In vain have I washed my hands in innocence." So here we go. Here's his real problem. He can see that people are ruthlessly exploiting others and being rewarded for it, and he wants in. That's his problem. That's where his doubt has come from. He seems to be missing out. This is nothing more, in one sense, than FOMO. He wants a piece of the action. He wants his own reward, and he doesn't want to keep going, trusting God and doing the right thing. Instead, he wants in on the dishonest gain that he sees in others. In other words, I think that's simply a way of saying there are at least two kinds of doubts, if not more. There's a kind of honest doubt, where you might genuinely be questioning something from a very heartfelt and in a very honest way. And there are some doubts that are simply dishonest. There are some doubts that just are dishonest. You might have heard of a guy called Aldous Huxley. Back in the 1920s and 1930s, he was a writer in London, a philosopher. He was something of a well-known and kind of sophisticated and very erudite kind of person. And he wrote a book called Brave New World, which is what he's best known for, I think, today. In one of his other books, it's called Ends and Means, he writes about Christian faith and why he isn't a Christian. And he says something really striking. I'll read it to you. It's a bit lengthy, but stay with it. He says, I had motives for not wanting the world to have a meaning, and consequently assumed that it had none, and was able without any difficulty to find satisfying reasons for this assumption. For myself, as no doubt for most of my friends, the philosophy of meaningless was essentially an instrument of liberation from a certain system of morality. We objected to the morality because it interfered with our sexual freedom. We don't know because we don't want to know. There's a kind of honesty to his dishonesty, isn't there? Which is in one way almost admirable. He's simply saying, I don't want Christianity to be true. Because if it's true, then it's going to make some claims on me. It's going to interfere with my sexual freedom, and I'm not really up for that. So I'm going to say that the world is meaningless and has no meaning, and therefore I can live and behave exactly as I want to. Sometimes our doubts are just dishonest. And actually, we've got skin in the game. We don't want something to be true, so therefore we find a reason that it can't be true. But even where the doubts are honest, and often they are honest, even then, I think we still need to question them. Because, of course, whenever we are dealing with a doubt about something to do with God or with Christianity, that doubt is based on a prior belief and based on a prior commitment. It's not possible to doubt belief A without holding on to belief B. So what is it? What is belief B for you? What is the belief that's causing you to doubt belief A? Let me try to, that sounds quite complicated. Let me try to give you an example. Imagine someone says to you, it's simply impossible to know enough to be sure about God or religion. In a world where there are so many religions and so many theories and speculation, how can we possibly say that Christianity has it right? Now, on one level, that's kind of a good question, and there's a lot of doubt that's kind of going on with that. But what's the belief underneath the doubt? Well, it's simply that they know enough about the nature of religious knowledge to be certain of what they just said. There's a belief there that they can see and know in a kind of exhaustive kind of way about the whole kind of religious situation in all of the world to be able to say that there's too much knowledge out there, so we can't hold on to Christian truth. There was I don't know if it's still there, on Shacklewell Lane, opposite Nando's. For a little while, there's been a billboard that's just had these words on it. All systems are lying to you. All systems are lying to you. I don't know if it's advertising something. It doesn't say anything else. There isn't a brand there. It's just got those words. Someone's paid just to have those words up on a billboard. And of course, you read that and you think, including this system, including what you've just said, is that a lie as well? I don't know if that's a lie as well. If it is a lie as well, then how can I trust that all systems are lying to me? I can't trust that all systems are lying to me, can I? Of course I can't. So if yours is the only system that isn't lying to me, well, why do you get an exemption from every other system in the world? That's come out much stronger than I meant it to. I haven't been going past every day stewing about the philosophical incoherence of that billboard, but it's there. And my point is simply this. Are we going to be fair-minded? and hold our doubts up to the same standard that we hold our doubts about Christianity up to? Is that what we're going to do or not? That's what Asaph does in Psalm 73. He's honest about why he is doubting. And because he's honest about it, he's able to work through it. He is doubting his doubts. That's the first key. Secondly, verse 17, we need to bow the knee. Have a look down at verse 15. Asaph writes, "If I had said, I will speak thus, I would have betrayed your children. When I tried to understand all this, it was oppressive to me till I entered the sanctuary of God, that I understood their final destiny." Verse 17 is the hinge point of the whole psalm. Asaph recalls entering the sanctuary in the temple. And it's the moment where his perspective begins to change. He's reminded of eternal realities and what reckless chasing after wealth really produces. And so his perspective begins to shift. But the point is that happens when he goes to the sanctuary to worship. He goes to bow his knee. He goes to worship. He goes to pray and sing and approach God. He goes to worship. And that's the moment at which his doubts begin to shift. And here's the point for us. We sometimes tell ourselves that our doubts only arise because of what we are thinking. But the truth is, we don't think our way into doubting. Actually, doubts arise because of all sorts of reasons that are going on. Doubts arise from all sorts of experiences that we go through. And just as we don't think our way into doubting, so it is that you won't only think your way out. Doubts arise from what we experience. There are all kinds of appeals being made to our senses through the week, telling us that God isn't real or that he can't be trusted. And it's only when we gather together to worship that an appeal is made to our whole being, to our mind and our body, telling us the truth about who God is. So if you want to treat your doubts fairly, if you want to be fair with your doubts, you need to bring them to church. If you want to be fair with your doubts, you need to bring them to church. Otherwise, all you are doing is you're carrying around your beliefs about God through the week. And you're subjecting those beliefs to everything that the world is telling you and telling your senses, but you never do the opposite. You never bring your doubts into church and hold those up to the light of all that God is as you worship him. I think you could even say that people who are deeply skeptical about Christianity ought to do exactly the same thing. Last week, I mentioned rather pompously an 18th century French Catholic philosopher by the name of René Descartes. So this week, I'm going to mention another one. You might have heard the name Blaise Pascal. Pascal was an extraordinary thinker. He was an amazing mathematician and a scientist and a philosopher. If he's known for anything today, you might have heard of Pascal's wager, if that kind of rings a bell. He's kind of misunderstood or misremembered for his wager. But his basic advice to his skeptical, unbelieving friends, because he kind of spent a lot of time with them, was that they ought to go to church. And he didn't say you ought to go to church because it's a kind of fake it till you make it kind of thing. His point was simply to say that they needed to start living as though Christianity was true, because then they might find that it's true. In one of his scrapbooks of thoughts, he didn't ever write a kind of major theological treatise. He just left these kind of notebooks full of kind of occasional thoughts that he wrote down. But one of his scrapbooks was the following. He wrote, "An infinite distance lies between knowledge of God and love of God." An infinite distance lies between knowledge of God and love of God. And so do you hear what he's saying? He's kind of saying it's not enough just to try to kind of think your way into Christian worship, into kind of trying to understand who God is simply by rationalizing or reasoning your way in. You can't make God, if you really want to find him, you can't just make him an object of speculation, as if he's some kind of distant, abstract, kind of philosophical problem to be solved. He says, actually, the way in, the only way in, is to worship him. And once you start worshipping him, you might just find that he is really there and that he really is worthy of your worship. The way that we learn isn't just by thinking our way towards God, but by bowing the knee in worship. And you can't treat the God who deserves your love as only worthy of your knowledge. And if you do that, you'll just never find him, and your doubts about him will just never shift. We start by bowing the knee in worship. Lastly, third key for us as we are trying to deal with our doubts, we need to know his presence. Have a look down at verse 23. The tone of these last few verses is just kind of extraordinary, so different at the end of the psalm to the beginning. But this is what Asaph says in verse 23. Yet I am always with you. You hold me by my right hand. You guide me with your counsel, and afterwards you will take me in glory. Whom have I in heaven but you, and earth has nothing I desire besides you. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. You hear the confidence and the assurance of those words and how far Asaph has moved from the start of the psalm to the end. He's got this amazing, deep, rich confidence and assurance that God is there and that God is with him. Yet I am always with you. You hold me by my right hand. One doubt that the Bible claims every human will struggle with is fear of God himself, a fear of what he might ask of us, a fear of whether he will actually really accept us kind of for who we are and for what we've done, a deep-rooted fear that God ultimately isn't for us, that he's not on our side, that he doesn't care, that deep down he is distant. And if that is what we think that God is like, obviously we'll never get through our doubts. If we are fundamentally fearful of God himself, we'll never be able to stop doubting him. Yet that's not where Asaph is. I'm always with you. You hold me by my right hand. How did Asaph get there? Well, simply this way. The other dimension of the sanctuary, which we mentioned a moment ago back in verse 17, is sacrifice. That's what happens when you go to a sanctuary. In the Old Testament, in the temple, you would see in the sanctuary an animal being offered up and slaughtered on behalf of the worshipper as a sign of atonement being made for sin. An animal would die as a sign of atonement for sin. And so Asaph here, even though he doesn't know it clearly, is pointing us towards the death and resurrection of Jesus himself. Because on the cross, the New Testament tells us that Jesus himself is that atonement offering made in our place. He is the one who is offered up as a propitiation, is the Bible words, as an atonement offering made in our place. And what that means is that out of everyone in history, Jesus himself knew the greatest sense of spiritual disconnection. That when he died on the cross, he knew the truth of verse 2 more deeply and more clearly and more truly than anyone else has ever done. As for me, my feet had almost slipped. I had nearly lost my foothold. Jesus knew what it was like to lose his footing completely. He knew what it was like, in the terms of verse 23, for God actually to let go of his hands as he bore in our place everything that we deserve. And he did that so that in the midst of his spiritual disconnection, you and I can know for sure that God will never let go of us. See, Jesus went through all of that. He bore it all in his own body on the cross. He knew that disconnection. He knew what it was like to be cut adrift, so that for you and I now today, when doubts arise, even when we're doubting God himself and his own nature and his character, we can still pray with Asaph in confidence, yet I'm always with you. We can say that for sure and for certain, even at the very moment we're doubting God himself. Even at the moment, we're doubting whether God's even there, whether he's even for us. We can say with Asaph, I'm always with you. I can bring my doubts into your presence, and it's safe to do so because Jesus has died for me, because he's risen to new life for me. He was cut off for me so that I might know I am always with you, and you hold me by your right hand. 3 keys to dealing with doubt. Doubting our doubts, bowing the knee in worship, and knowing his presence. Let me stop there. I'm going to give us a moment just to be quiet where we're sitting. I'm going to pray and ask that the Spirit would bring his word home to our hearts. And then in just a moment, as we continue to reflect, music will be played. So let me give us a moment to be quiet, then I'll pray, and then we'll hear some music before we carry on with our service. Let's take a moment to be quiet.